do that. Go through your textbook and find a piece of paper. And if you can find a legal size piece of paper with a lot of room to write on and write really small, this will help you review for the exam. And it's something you can use once you get into real estate. And I call this sheet everything you ever wanted to know about real estate sheet. But you can't put that on the sheet, even though that's what it's going to be. You're going to put on the top of one side of this page everything you should know as a buyer. And then on the other side of the page, you're going to put everything you should know as a seller of real estate in New York. And then go through, starting on page 1 of your textbook, and read carefully like your life depends on it. Go through and list all the laws and regulations that apply or benefit a buyer. And then on the other side, everything that applies to a seller. And here's why I say this. Because even if you're a robot, which we're not, but sometimes the laws treat us like if we were, it would be a better place. You can't remember to have conversations with every single person that you're dealing with and say to them, okay, did I describe what a stigmatized property is and how the law is that applies to that? Did I explain to you what happens with property condition disclosure forms? Do you know that good faith estimates have to be delivered to you within 3 days? You know, there's so many things that people can get mad at you about as a professional real estate person. But what a wonderful world if you could hand them a sheet that has everything on there. You send them an email that says, did you receive the sheet? You could give it a name, give it a fancy name. I don't care what you call it. Did you receive the sheet that explains everything you'd ever want to know as a buyer or seller of real estate in New York? You know, like if you didn't hand it to them, then you could ask them if they received it. If you handed it to them as part of your buyer interview or your seller interview, then you can confirm that you gave it to them so that 2 years later when they try to sue you and say that you never told me about the stigmatized rule, you never told me, Sally, real estate agent, that if I wanted to know if someone was murdered at a home, that I had to write you a note that you would give to the listing agent of that property, who then would have to give it to the seller of the property, who then decides whether they want to respond or not. Turns out that's the law that I'm talking about with stigmatized properties. That agent cannot just go ahead and tell you that someone was murdered on the front porch of that property or someone committed suicide at that property. A lot of people are dropping dead. I don't know if you know this, and it's not even from COVID necessarily. A lot of people commit suicide in our country. And sometimes they pick really bad places to do it, like the basement of the house or the attic or somewhere at the house. And that stigmatizes the house. You know? So, long story short, if you do this sheet that covers all the different laws and regulations, you know, there's environmental things that you can put on there. I never met a buyer that came up to me and said, oh, hey, Mike, I care about whether USTs, that stands for underground storage tanks, I care about whether my neighbor who might have an underground storage tank, because I live in Springville, New York, which is a rural community, might have leached onto my property. So what do I do about that? But you can address that as you flip through and say to yourself, okay, yeah, I think this is important to a buyer. Oh, no, I think this is important to a seller. Sometimes it overlaps. It's important to both. So you just decide, because it turns out that people will look at both sides of it, whether you're working and representing them as a buyer or seller. Like regardless of the hat that they're wearing in the transaction, they will look at both sides of it. But what a great, and I didn't say it has to be 12-point font. You can make it 5 or 6-point font so you fit it on there. But it's a great way to take care of lots of disclosures. You still have to do your agency disclosure form and follow the rules for that as was covered earlier in the program. But this is nice to let them know about the laws that affect them. And what I would encourage you to do is, if you make up this sheet, Show it to the broker that you associate with and say, I learned this at school. The instructor recommended we do this. First, it makes a great review before we take the final exam for the state and for the school. And then secondly, it turns out that there's no downside for me to let the buyer or seller know about all the different laws that I need to be aware of anyways. That's part of what I learned. But here's all the laws that you should know as you enter the realm of real estate, because, if the people have only rented apartments over the years, they don't even know about all the different things that affect them as a purchaser of real estate. Special assessments. Look what we learned about special assessments yesterday. That can be addressed on that form. So it not only makes a great review for you, it's actually something that you can use in the field. And I cannot see any reason why any person that sponsors you would say, oh, no, I don't want you to inform buyers and sellers of the laws and regulations that could affect them. As a matter of fact, if you do this and you have someone that sponsors you that doesn't want you to do this, I want to know who they are. I want to talk to them. It would be very fun for me to have a conversation with them. I can't even imagine a logical reason for someone to say that there's a downside to advising your buyers and sellers of all the different rules and regulations that affect them. Okay?